Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Alex Safranis, and today we're on with Chris Silvestri. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm a messaging strategies and conversion copywriter. I call myself the conversion alchemist just because I mixed a couple of different things into what I do. It's a lot about conversion copywriting, messaging strategy, but also about user experience. And it all comes from my background, which, if you want, we can go into. But I help B2B SaaS companies find their message market fit and convert more of their prospects into customers on their websites, emails, and sales collaterals.
Yeah, that's really important. Tell us about your background, what got you into this industry.
Yeah, so a bit of a funny story. I used to be a software engineer in industrial automation. Did that for 10 years. And at the same time, I'm also a drummer. I used to play punk rock in a band for actually like 25 years. And we try to do it very seriously to the point where we started touring Europe. And I was getting sick of having to ask for time off 3 months in advance. So I started looking for how to make money online because I wanted something flexible, right? So that's how I actually stumbled on copywriting. I did a couple of different things before that, but then I was instantly hooked by the psychology behind copywriting, the understanding of decision making processes, and started doing that on the sides, weekends, until I was pretty confident that I could take it full time. And that's when I took the leap. And in 2018, I went full time into doing conversion copywriting. Then I did a couple of years as a user experience designer, UX lead at a usability testing startup, which taught me a lot of the various things that I'm combining to what I do. And then got back on my own doing what I do now, Conversion Alchemy, in 2021. And it's been a very good and interesting challenge and road so far.
That's interesting, a unique background for sure. So, when you're approaching conversion rate optimization, or I
Mm.
guess creating copy to optimize conversion rate, what's your approach? Are you thinking about crafting different messages based on the different stages that the prospect is in at that time? What's your
Mm.
approach?
Yeah. So what I always tell my clients is 70% of the work is actual research. So the first thing that I do before even writing any single word is doing the research. And I have a very pretty structured framework for how I think about researching. But mostly at the fundamental level, I like to divide my research into the internal research, so understanding my client's team, their point of view, their knowledge of the product and customers, speaking with sales. Then the external research, which that's when the prospects and customers come in, just because we want to have that transformation that needs to happen. We want to map it out and understand how we can fill the gap. And then the market research is the probably last area, where we look at competitors, how they position themselves, what kind of copy they use, what level of awareness and sophistication they address, and see where we can differentiate ourselves and how we can differentiate ourselves, combining all of the other insights that we got from the internal and external research. So the first thing that I do is always research. And then, as you said, understanding kind of the level of awareness, where at what point do we need to jump in to match the conversation that they are already having inside their heads, because that's the other important thing. We are not the job of your copy. It's not to just to tell people what you do and shout it out. It's mostly to match a conversation that's already happening inside their heads. If you think about yourself, when you look at a website, you're already having this kind of decision making process inside your head that you've been going through probably for a couple of days. When you land on a website, the first thing that you ask yourself is this copy that I'm seeing here, the copy, the design, all of it, does it match what I'm looking for, my thought process, and also does it use the words that I would use to explain it? And that's our job. Our first job to hook people is to match that conversation, and then we can dive into the explanations, the what we do, the why we do it, the features, the benefits, and all of that.
Gotcha. So, I'm curious about the competitor angle. So you mentioned positioning yourself in a unique way depending on how the competitors are positioning themselves. Do you ever call out the competitor names? What are your thoughts
Hmm,
around
it's a
direct
great
competition?
it's a great question. I usually don't call out competitors on generic copy, homepage or product pages, features pages, or use cases, but there's a very useful and effective ways to call them out for competitor comparison pages, which is actually those pages that appear in Google if you search, for example, I know alternative to XYZ product, right? So you are actually you want to contrast two different specific options, and in that case, I think it makes sense to mention competitors and call them out. So that's a really good use case where I would actually name a competitor. Other cases, maybe if you know that maybe you are fighting your when it comes to that conversations, the conversation that your prospects are having when they land on your website, if you know that you are basically fighting against maybe one other very strong competitor, that maybe in that case I would mention competitors or at least hint at what they do that's characteristic of them and contrast it to what we do, so that even if I don't mention them, it's clear that we are talking about them, but at the same time we don't specifically name them, right? So those are probably the two cases where I would hint or mention competitors directly.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you're looking at a competitor that has, let's say they list their whatever copy, whatever strengths that they have for their customers or prospects, are you looking to find different things that your client's business can provide for the prospects, or are you looking to match and add a little bit more? Basically, is it a totally unique set of advantages that you want to share, or do you want some overlap?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of my clients come to me thinking that they need to be completely unique, do things completely differently. But when it comes to our positioning strategy work, what I typically find, especially nowadays, because it's very hard to be 100% unique and do things completely differently, what I kind of recommend is at least let's find the 3 to 4 different, as April Dunford calls them, value themes, differentiated value themes in your positioning. So, what are the 3 4 different areas that you operate in a slightly unique or better or different way? And it doesn't mean that each of those needs to be completely unique, but when combine them, you are the only one that does all of those 3 4 things together, right? And that's, I think, your differentiator, what makes you different. So in that case, it's not impossible to differentiate. You just need to have the right combination of those capabilities and value themes that are right for your specific audience that they care about.
So when the company is creating an ad, would you say they should have as many of those differentiators and just value points in the same ad as possible, or is it better to have different ads with different angles?
Yeah, I would definitely first test the different angles for ads, just because for optimization, it's probably best first to make sure that you're being as specific as possible. So first, I would probably test different angles, and then if we find that maybe okay, the combination works better, then okay, it makes sense to combine them and expand on that combination as a whole.
Hmm. So you mentioned testing. What is your recommendation when testing copy? Is it just to create as much different kinds of copy as possible and test those, or just how do you approach that conversation for how much
Mm.
copy should we be creating?
Yeah, as far as much copy, I don't really create a ton of variants. Maybe I focus more on the key points, the main headline, value proposition. I create alternative for those. Or when it comes to specific product pages, I might create different hero section alternatives. But as far as testing, yes, you can A/B test with a lot of different variants if you want, and if you have the traffic, because that's the other thing, you need to have the traffic if you want to A/B test. But you can also run qualitative tests. There's one B2B messaging testing platform that's called Winter, where you can actually poll users that, especially for B2B, it's hard typically to recruit them. So you can find people in that demographic, that psychographic, firmographic that match your audience, and you can have them look at your copy and give you a qualitative opinion, qualitative feedback, which can be pretty accurate, but you need an audience that matches or somehow gets as close as possible to your audience, which is easier to in B2C when you have normal consumers, right, buy products, harder in B2B. Other things that you could do when it comes to actually evaluating current copy that one of my clients can have, I also look at, and this comes from maybe from my UX background, I look a lot at heat maps, user interaction data. So looking at where people click, where they focus on when they read your copy, how far down the page they scroll, and also user recording. So you can see how people interact with your website and whether or not they go back and forth because maybe they are confused on a specific piece of copy. So I use all of that to try then to optimize the new copy that we write. So that in a way can be considered as testing, and you can do it once you launch the new copy as well. Another maybe tactic could be to launch quick website surveys. So those little pop-ups that appear on the page where you can ask a couple of quantitative questions, where you can ask people what kind of persona they are, whether or not they are finding all the information on the current page where they are on, whether anything is confusing. So all of those are kind of quantitative mix of quantitative and qualitative data that you can collect, I think, that goes a bit beyond the normal A/B testing, and kind of together with it actually gives you more of the why people think something, or why something works or doesn't work, right? And the other thing that I like to do is also usability testing. Obviously, coming from a usability testing background as well, I used to watch hundreds and hundreds of usability testing videos. I find that maybe even if your audience is not super close to your ICP, looking at how they consume the page, how they move through the navigation, how they interpret different pieces of copy, including the navigation labels, also gives you good context that then you can use to complement all of the other insights that you have. So I think these are probably some of the techniques, strategies that I use for testing and evaluating copy in general.
When you're looking at copy for ads that are going to land on different tactics like LinkedIn versus Facebook, do you have different approaches to different advertising platforms? Meaning, are there some that you're more detailed in versus some are better for more upper funnel messaging and brand messaging? What's your approach there?
I usually don't really work on ads. It's more of like website copy, emails, sales collaterals. So more of a down the funnel, more of like at the conversion point. But I would say for any platform, any channel, I think you kind of have to adapt to the general rules that apply on the platforms and to the awareness level that they are on the platform. Obviously, if I'm on LinkedIn, speaking of me as a consultant, and I want to speak to marketers or heads of growth at SaaS companies, and I write posts or run ads on LinkedIn, I'm going to be much more technical than if I was doing a post on Instagram, where the audience is more on the personal side. People maybe are out of work in the evenings, just scrolling Instagram, so maybe they just want something lighter. So I would always think context is everything. So that's why I always try to put myself in other people's shoes and in the environment that they're in, or what device are they using, how are they using it, and try to ask myself those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the website creation and copy, are you a fan of creating dynamic landing pages that personalize based on the industry or the persona? And how does somebody get to understanding what those different personas are?
Yeah, for personas, I typically like to have them all on the website, like in the navigation. So because what I found is a lot of people use navigations to orient themselves. So they kind of, when you jump, especially if you are part of a decision-making unit in B2B, you want to see that actually the company is speaking to all the other guys at your company, so that you can bring them proof or some of the information they need to contribute to the buying decision. When it comes to actual dynamic content, I'm actually working currently with a B2B company. It's actually a non-profit, but they address both the B2C and B2B sides because they are partners as well. And so in their case, we want to speak to two different markets, the UK and US markets. So in that case, what we are doing is actually using dynamic pages based on location, geolocalized. When people land on that page, if they are in the US, they're going to see the US page. UK, you're going to see the UK page. But that's because of an important factor, which is the two markets use a completely different language. So I don't know how aware you are in the US of the DEA landscape, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's
Oh yeah.
it's basically changing in real time now with Trump and all this stuff. And so for the US, we needed to have a very specific messaging angle. For the UK, completely different, right? So that's why we are using that dynamic content and dynamic pages. But yeah, in general, I like, for when addressing personas, I like to have them all on the page, unless maybe we are trying different variants for one specific persona, and then maybe we could do a dynamic page.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Just especially when there's actual, business messaging differences by region that would, one would have to personalize. Yeah, I'm curious about transitioning over to the writing portion of the copy and using AI. Oftentimes, AI output can be a little bit robotic. I'm curious how you use AI to write copy that better resonates with audiences.
Yeah, so again, I think AI can't really replace you. It's just basically an augmentation, right? So if you are the expert, I see it as a more of like an assistant, or not really an intern, more like an assistant that helps you take whatever you're doing and do it better, faster, more efficiently. And I use it in every stage of my process. So in my research, strategy, and writing, I like to use AI in all of those. And how typically I like to use it for writing, it's like good writing with AI comes because of all the preparation work that you do before. It's not that you jump on ChatGPT and ask it, "Hey, write me this landing page." It's gonna suck. So the way that I approach it is basically have it follow my entire process from beginning to end. So kind of my chat, let's say, knows everything that I'm doing, including transcripts of my conversations with clients, interviews that I had with their customers, survey data, research data, all of it. It's basically included in those first conversation. And for those, I like to use a model, something like Gemini, that has got the biggest context windows possible, so that it can take as much of that stuff into memory and actually retrieve it effectively. You can also use ChatGPT or Claude, but their memory is not as big. So those for me come into play later in the stages. So when we get to the actual strategy and writing, that's when something like Claude can be effective, because at that stage, I already have all of my strategy documents crystallized and formed. So with 3, 4 comprehensive documents that I share with the chat, then Claude can actually follow all the guidelines that we have, all the messaging pillars that we have inside, the value propositions, and then it can actually write copy that's effectively without having to upload massive documents to its memory, right? So it's quite efficient. So I like to have that differentiation, big context for research at the initial stages, and then gradually fine tuning and narrowing down, so then it can use those insights crystallized to actually write the copy.
I like that. So you're using different AIs depending on the context window, and I guess just generally how they tend to perform for creating copy. Would you say that
Yeah.
something like Claude is better than Gemini when you have those strategy docs created?
Yeah, what I found is that Claude is much better at actually sounding human and mirroring the voice guidelines that you create. And all let's keep in mind, those voice guidelines all come from real research with real customers, right? So it's not like stuff that we come up randomly. When you do the research properly, then I think Claude is one of the best ones at actually mirroring your specific voice and actually sounding human and not having all of those different annoying little traits that you can spot in AI writing, right? It's probably the best. And I don't actually use Claude for writing. I use Claude's API just because I need to write a lot of stuff, and I typically reach Claude's limit quite fast. So I use another tool with my team that's called Team GPT that's plugged into Claude's AI, where we can actually basically use Claude's engine, Sonnet 3.7 now. Versions change every day. Can use that to basically write all the copy that we need basically, and it's quite effective once you have all those strategy documents uploaded to the knowledge.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to talk about those strategy documents. What sort of
Mhm.
frameworks or like what kind of information are you gathering from customers to help build a framework?
Yeah, so for from customers, what we do in our research, it's what a lot of companies do is they try to run surveys. They ask, okay, what do you think about the product? What would you like to see? All those like good product development questions. But what you actually want to know, it's the decision making process, right? The what people call jobs to be done insights, which basically tell you how people progress from the situation they're in to the actual and desired state they want to be in from buying your product, right? So we want to map out their decision making process. So which means asking them about the before they were considering your solution, what alternatives they were considering back then, what drove them to actually look for a new solution, including yours, and when it was time to evaluate different solution, what other solutions were evaluating along yours, what moved them to buy or sign up for your solution product, and then the kind of the during now that you're using this product, what can you do that you weren't able to before? That's one example question. Or what's the biggest problem that this solution solves for you? That tells you a lot about the value proposition and the words that people use to express that value proposition. And then also the after, right? So now that they're using this product, then we can ask questions about what would you want to see, or what features are indispensable, or some of the more product development UX related questions, which are all good to complement the current insight. And we want to what are you the kind of assets that I usually try to cover are customer interviews. Those qualitative insights are probably the 80/20 of customer research. We might run surveys where we can be a bit more qualitative, some of those website surveys that I mentioned earlier, or email surveys. We might ask people who maybe tried the product, if you had a trial but didn't sign up. So we can also cover all those details. What else? For customers, what I usually do is also ask my clients if they have sales conversations, sales recordings. All of those are really good, especially because they save us time on booking interviews, and we can jump right in, understand how their prospects think, what kind of objections they have, what kind of angles and messaging works already that their sales team is using. So all of those are golden. And yeah, I would say this is pretty much what we do for customers. The usability testing as well, all of those UX insights are well come into play, but depends on the stage of the company as well. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. The other thing, probably a good one, looking at competitor website, but not to copy them. It's what I do is kind of deconstructing what they're doing based on a framework and understanding, okay, how are they addressing these specific objections? How are they expressing these features? What language they use? So all of those good things that you can also understand from review mining, which is basically looking at review websites like G2 Crowd or Capterra, looking at reviews for your competitors and also for your product if you have any. But even if you don't, just looking at how your competitors' customers express their feedback, what brought them to sign up for their product, what they like, what they don't like, all of those, if you can extract the main themes and the language that they use, it's really good. It can help you actually use and mirror some of the language in your copy. That's what we call the voice of customer. So once we have voice of customer in a document, which means how do people talk about these specific angles, these specific pain points, desired outcomes, or struggles. And that's also another document that I like to share with AI when it comes to writing, which I think it's great because it's not limited to your own language. It can also include some of the specific, very sometimes emotional or very expressive language that your customers might use, and it's very good, especially to steer clear from that AI jargon and actually speak like humans speak.
Hmm. That's really insightful. Yeah, I could see myself working through a lot of those, to help on future projects. So I'm curious, how when you're actually writing the copy, how do you take someone from indecision to action?
Hmm. That's a very good question. From indecision to action. So I think the biggest factor behind indecision is that there's lack of clarity in the messaging, whether it's your competitor's messaging, your messaging. It basically means that no messaging is standing out. And when it comes to standing out, it's yes about the product, the features, the benefits that you offer. But I also think one of the undervalued aspects of differentiation is also your point of view, right? Which means what's that unique insight that only you have on how competitors or the industry or your customers are approaching this problem solution? What's that unique insights that you have that brought you to actually build this product, sell this service, or whatever, right? What's that point of view? I think if you can express your unique point of view alongside the specific benefits and features of your product, that it's kind of a frame that you have around a painting that makes the whole thing stand out more than if it was just you talking about your product and how you do things. So that's another thing that we try to kind of extract in our research from speaking with founders or marketing teams. It's to gauge their point of view by asking specific questions like what are your customers doing wrong and what's the solution that you offer to that, or what are your competitors doing wrong, what's the solution, what are some myths or lies that have been spread around in the industry. Or one of my favorite is probably what drives you crazy about the industry. And especially if you're speaking with a founder, it's something that's like a burning pain that they had to work through and solve. And that gives you really good insights and language as well that you can use in your copy to actually make everything else stand out.
Hmm. So, final question. I'm curious about what companies typically, when they don't have ideal copy, where do they typically go wrong?
Mm.
What's like the most common issue you see?
Yeah, probably it's a lack of clarity, conciseness. They basically can't express what they do for customers, how they match that conversation that I was speaking about at the beginning. They are not able to express that on the page, which means mostly they're about their value proposition, hero section. A lot of times that is basically just this is what we are, what we do, and that's it, right? So Matt Lerner, really great guy, consultant in the B2B growth, has this framework that I think is really helpful. When you think about your value proposition, he says the value your value proposition should complete the phrase "I want to XYZ," right? So think about a productivity software or project management software that helps you save 2 hours a day in productivity. If you tell them save 2 hours a day, that sentence is completing the phrase I want to, right? I want to save 2 hours a day. So that really helps you put yourselves in the frame of mind of this is something that's going on in their head. I need to actually complete that sentence here. It's not just telling them what we do and how at this point yet. That comes after. So I think that value proposition is probably one of the first areas where I see their messaging goes wrong. The other one is it's probably when it comes to personas. A lot of companies think of personas in terms of demographics, firmographics, but they don't really focus on addressing the psychographics, so how they think and make decisions, especially in combination in B2B, in combination with other personas in the decision making unit, the buying committee. So that's a really good and important point when it comes to addressing, especially when we talk about use case pages, more like internal pages or persona pages, where we need to speak to that persona but also provide them with information for the other guys in the buying committee, right? And the hardest part there, I think, especially because a lot of companies might not run those customer interviews, they don't really have enough language to mirror how each specific persona speaks, right? So it's hard for them to put themselves in their shoes, and the message ends up being bland and kind of generic across the board. So, which is the opposite of when you actually speak to all of these different personas, know how they speak, what kind of points you need to emphasize. Then you can see that those pages come to life, and you have very specific messaging angles and voice and language for all different personas, and that's when actually your copy as a whole is effective.
That's really insightful. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been a great episode, and I really appreciate you joining.
Thanks so much, Alex. Loved it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you soon.